Good morning, good morning, good morning. I see lots of hugs and all of that. The introverts, hey, your relief has come. It's over. You made it. I'm an introvert. I understand. It's one of the most terrifying times in any service I go to when they're like, turn around and greet. Or in some churches, turn around and pray with the people around you. Sweaty palms. I start to hyperventilate. So I get it. Good morning. If you are a guest here, my name is Dan. I am the teaching pastor here and get this awesome opportunity to open up God's Word for all of us. I believe that God's Word is relevant and important for all of us to continually find ways for it to apply to our lives every day. We started a series 2 weeks ago on leadership. Not something that's maybe a typical Sunday morning topic, but it is something that is important to our church. It's something that's one of our core values. We want to be a church that is developing and helping encourage leaders. Last time, we asked how many of you think you're a leader, and that number was less than those that actually filled a leadership role at your job, in your home, whatever it is. Most people don't think of themselves as a leader, but we said, you know what? In its very, very basic essence, a leader is someone who has influence. And everyone in this room has influence somewhere. That influence that you have may be something as simple as in your home. It may be something as simple as with your friends, that you can move them and encourage them and bring them along with you to do something, to like something, to think something, whatever it is. So if you really want to go there, all of us are leaders. But some of us, it's a lot more natural, and maybe we're given a more prominent position. Maybe it's more habitual for us to do, whereas others of us, maybe it's just in that moment that we go into a leader. Now, last time that we talked, my big idea for the day was a role won't change your reality. Getting a role of leadership won't change the reality of your life. There are some that think if I was just in this position, things would be different. I would be different. And the reality that we talked about is that when you are given a position of leadership, everything about your life is going to be amplified. Who you are before you are given that role is who you are going to be after you are given that role. It's going to be a lot more visible for all to see. And that may be good in your life. That may be your strengths. But your weaknesses are also going to be amplified. And we encouraged everybody that even before you're given a role of leadership, even before, you may want to be a parent one day. You may want to be the boss at your own business or whatever. Work on the character attributes and the things that will be required of you now before you are given the role. Don't wait till then, because the role won't change you. I want to continue today at this look on leadership. And a very important one, and it's talking about cost and how much it is important for us to step into areas of leadership because of the cost. Now, you may not be familiar with this phrase, but let me give you a little bit of backstory. The phrase is Genovese syndrome. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Genovese syndrome, but in 1964 in New York City, there was a young woman who had just finished her shift at a bar that she was working at. She went home to her house, and as she was getting close to her house, unfortunately, and it was all over the news, she was violently attacked by somebody. As she laid there and cried out for help outside of the very building that she lived, with hundreds of apartments in there, people living in there, people turned on their lights to look out to see who was calling, or maybe they shouted some words out to her, are you okay, and so on. But that was about as far as it went. And when she wouldn't really respond to them, they turned off their lights and they went back to sleep. The attacker, who, by the way, ran off when the lights went on, when the lights went off in the building, came running back to attack her again. Horrible tragedy. She eventually dies. The police finally show up. Somebody finally took the initiative, and they were there within 2 minutes to where she was. That's as long as it took them to get there. They could have been there earlier. But nobody called. Nobody got involved. Nobody stepped in to try and save the life of Kitty Genovese. And when they interviewed the people in the building were like, well, we thought somebody else was taking care of it. I didn't want to get involved. I have no weapon to defend a person like this. Well, I thought somebody else was going to call. Everybody had a excuse for why they did not step into this horrible, horrible situation that cost the life of one woman. See, there's a really well-known statement, and it's been used by several, including JFK, and it's that evil prevails when good people do what? Nothing. All of us know that. All of us know that. But really, do all of us step in when evil is happening around us, in our homes? Maybe we want some, clarity as to what evil is, because that sounds, like one of those, characters in a movie who's evil. They even say it that way, so it sounds more evil. Maybe we're not sure what evil is. But all of us know that if people don't do anything, evil prevails. It wins. And so we have to evaluate our own lives. I would bet that there has been a situation in your life, in your work, whatever it is, in a church maybe that you attended at one time, that you saw something happening that was not right. It was wrong. And you didn't step into that situation. Just like the people in New York City who wouldn't step into the situation with Kitty Genovese. Maybe you say, well, I thought somebody else should handle it. They were more equipped. They were better at it. Well, I don't really want to get pulled into that. That's just a whole lot to ask of me. And for whatever reason, you never inserted yourself in there to be a leader and to do the right thing, even though we know that when good people do nothing, evil prevails. Maybe you've been on the other end of it. Maybe you have had wrong done to you. And it's obvious for all to see this wrong that has happened to you, and you're waiting for somebody to step in to help you. And you see people that maybe they ask you about it, but they get away from that topic real quickly. Or maybe they come to check on you, but they don't do anything. And you're left there going, do you see what's happening? Good grief, do something, help me. Evil prevails when good people do nothing. I want to take a look today at a character of the Bible. And just like last time, I get to summarize about 9 chapters of the Bible in about 10 to 15 minutes. So I hope you have your seatbelts on, minds engaged, and you drank a lot of strong coffee or tea this morning, okay? Or a Mountain Dew for some of you, all right? We are going to fly through the life of a very important person, that this truth of evil prevailing if a good person does nothing, this could be the best summary for her life. And that's someone that if you've been raised in church, you know the story probably. But we need to look at this again. And it comes out of the Old Testament and a woman named Esther. Amazing book. It's a very unusual book in the Bible because it's the only book of the Bible that doesn't mention God. And people have debated, should this even be included in the Bible? And yet, a lot of the early church fathers said, yes, it should. Because here's the thing. Though God's name may not be mentioned, God is visible in this book. God may not always be yelling out loud and getting your attention or showing up as a fireball in front of you, but God is at work behind the scenes, even when it may seem like he is silent. And Esther is truly, truly a picture of this. I want to encourage you all real quick, a little bit of homework to start us. Read this book this week. It's roughly 10 chapters. It's very much a narrative, very interesting read. And again, look at how you see God at work behind the scenes. For those of you who don't know anything about Esther, here we go. All right? Let's start. So the Persian Empire is the largest empire in the world. They basically are ruling and dominating over countries as far east as India and as far west as Greece. They are strong and mighty, and at the time, their king's name is Xerxes. Depending on what version of the Bible you read, there is sometimes other variations of his name given, but we're going to go with Xerxes today because it has 2 X's, and you can use it in Scrabble if you're allowed to use proper nouns. So, Xerxes. Now, Xerxes was not a follower of the God of the Bible. He was a Persian. And it says that after a very successful season as a nation, after dominating over all these other countries, he throws one amazing party. Some think that this went about 6 months long. That's a party. And for an introvert, that is death, okay? I don't want 6 months. My goodness, 6 minutes is sometimes too long. But 6 months this goes on, and there is wine and drinking and dancing, and it is a time of celebration. And Xerxes is having the time of his life. He's invited all these other rulers to it within the kingdom, and it is a great time. And he's a little bit on the, what's the best word to say, tipsy side at one point. And he calls for the queen. The queen is Vashti. He says, Vashti, I want you to put on your best robes. I want you to put on your crown, and I want you to dance and frolic in front of all of our guests. This is just a party. Vashti says, not doing it. Who do you think you're talking to? This doesn't go over really well with Xerxes. So much so that he says, okay, Vashti's no longer queen. You're gone. You're no longer in my harem. You're no longer queen. You're out. All the rights and privileges and all that stuff, gone. And immediately, Xerxes begins to search the territory that he rules over for a new queen. And there's a lot of details in here, but I'll give you the short version of it. Eventually, one rises to the top. It is a young Jewess named Esther. Esther is an interesting woman because Esther, we know nothing of her parents. She was raised by her cousin whose name was Mordecai. Esther's raised by Mordecai. Mordecai loves her like his own daughter. And she is chosen by Xerxes to be the new queen. And it says God had put special favor, if you will, on her because Xerxes had an amazing amount of respect for her in a way that you did not even hear of his respect for Vashti, his previous queen. So, great moment. She's made queen over all of the Persian Empire and is now married to the king. Now, so a little interesting side note. I love it when God does stuff like this to me. When I was studying this over the last 2 weeks, 2 weeks ago we talked about King Saul. And one of the parts of that story is we said King Saul, his character flaws came through. And one of those pictures of that was when he was to wipe out a tribe, and he doesn't. He preserves the life of the king, whose name was Agag. I said that's a great name if you're going to have a baby sometime soon, Agag. Agag, he preserves the life of Agag, the evil king that he was supposed to kill, and he didn't. I bring this up because little interesting stuff that goes on in the story. Remember it. And here's one of the reasons why. Mordecai, the cousin who raised Esther, was from the line of Kish. Kish was the father of who? Saul, not Agag, good guess. Saul. Saul was that whole story we just talked about. Wow, the story continues. We're now about 4 generations removed from Saul's dad. Saul, was a disgrace of a king. And now all of a sudden this Mordecai guy is a political leader, it's believed, within this kingdom of Persia. So anyway, I want to give that because it sets up some interesting ways of how God works through things of this. Okay, so I'm going to take a look, though, at Esther 2:10. It says this about Esther. Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem, she would have lived with the harem of women, to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. You get this picture of a nervous dad. Okay, is everything going okay there? What's the news with Esther? You get that picture of Mordecai, but it shows you his heart for his cousin. He raised her. He loved her. And it says that he forbade her to mention her ethnicity as a Jew. It is believed that the reason behind this is that anti-Semitism was on the rise at this time within the Persian kingdom. And you see other glimpses of it in a little bit. So, Esther is now queen. Great, awesome. Now what? Well, the story takes a little bit of an unexpected turn because it gives a report that Mordecai, her cousin at one point, overhears 2 guys plotting an assassination of Xerxes. And Mordecai reports it. It's investigated, and it comes to be true. But the story cuts off right there. Mordecai's not recognized for it. The king doesn't say, hey, thank you, or anything like that. It just sort of leaves it there, and it's like, okay, well, what was that all about? And the story continues. Now comes on the scene somebody else who is glorified, a man named Haman. Haman happens to be an Agagite, a descendant of Agag, who we talked about 2 weeks ago. Saul didn't do his job, and here's a descendant of Agag who survived because Saul didn't do what he was supposed to. Anyway, side note. All right. Haman is somebody, it says, that Xerxes magnifies and just blesses and says, this is a great man in front of all of Persia. And Haman, you can tell as you read the story, is a very insecure individual because he basically has to fall back on that, oh yeah, you know who I'm friends with? The king. Yeah. We're BFFs. We text, we FaceTime, all that stuff. He's always about throwing that out there that he's friends with the king. He's a very insecure man. And it says that Haman had one problem. See, there's a guy who walks around in the courtyard a whole lot, and whenever Haman walks by, Haman demands this person respect him and maybe honor him or bow to him or something. But this guy never does. And that guy was Mordecai. Mordecai refuses to respect Haman. It's believed that he knew an anti-Semitic heart within Haman. And Haman's so irritated at Mordecai, never honoring him, never bowing to him, that he says, that's it. I don't just want him dead, I want all his people dead. We're going to kill all the Jewish people. And so Haman begins to plot. And he goes to Xerxes, he's like, there's this group of people in the kingdom that are just rabble-rousers and they're weird. We just need to eliminate them. And Xerxes, not knowing who he's talking about, is like, okay, sounds good. I empower you to do it. And so a decree goes out across the land that says that the Jewish people will be killed. And the Jewish people are distraught over this. They know that they're going to be killed. One of those that is distraught the most is Mordecai. Mordecai reports this to his cousin Esther. It appears she did not know anything about this. And so he's like, did you hear what the king just proclaimed, that all of our people are going to be killed? We need you to do something. And Esther responds to her uncle in Esther 4:11-14. It says this, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has only one law, that they be put to death. In other words, if you go up to the king just because, hey, king, how you doing? Just thought I'd come see you, you're dead. But there is an exception. Unless the king extends his gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to the king, Esther says. It's been 30 days since she's seen the king. He just calls on her when he wants her. Now, some have said, is this a sign that maybe his love for her was waning a little bit? We don't know. But it is interesting that that's thrown in there. It goes on in verse 14. It says this, for if you remain silent at this time, this is Mordecai now talking. If you, Esther, remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your families, or father's family, will perish. You're going to be killed too. Why would they stop at us? You're going to. You're Jewish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Mordecai throws back at her. I understand you're terrified to go in front of the king to say something to him. And that there's only one thing he can do to raise the scepter. But maybe the reason that you were given this position was for such a time as this. This is your divine appointment. This is that moment. God has been at work behind the scenes. This is it. He challenges Esther. And Esther says, okay, I will put my life on the line because of what's at stake. And I will go before the king. But I want you, Mordecai, and all the Jewish people to fast for 3 days. And so they do. And as the 3 days ends, we pick up. And it says, Esther approaches the king. It says this in Esther 5:1-2. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace. in front of the king's hall. She doesn't come barging right in. She sort of stands just out of distance. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her. And he held out to her the golden scepter that was in his hand. First test is passed. God looked out for her. She could have been killed right then for what she did. But the cost was too great for her to do nothing. And so she approaches the king, and the king says, what do you want? I'll give you up to half the kingdom. And instead of right there saying, hey, this guy Haman is trying to kill all my people. I'm a Jewish person. Instead of doing that, she's like, I'm going to have a banquet. I'm going to put that on, a big party with you and myself and Haman, the man that you've honored and you said such a great guy. I want to have a banquet for you all. And so they have this banquet, and the banquet goes great, and Haman is like, look at me. I have this special private banquet with the king and the queen. What does that say about how great I am? And he comes out, and he is just on the top of the world. But before that, Esther says this, I want to have a second banquet with all of us again. Again, Haman's thinking, this is the greatest thing in the world. They're going to have a second banquet with me. This is awesome. But as Haman leaves, something happens. He goes by the courtyard. Guess who's standing there? Mordecai. Mordecai, once again, refuses to bow. Once again, refuses to honor Haman. Everybody else is, but Mordecai will not. And Haman gets so mad, he goes back and he tells his wife and family about this Mordecai individual, and his wife and family encourage him, hey, you know what you ought to do? You ought to put a pole up, an impalement pole. If you don't know what impalement is, it's terrible. You ought to put an impalement pole up and get Mordecai and impale him on that. And that'll be ultimate. You'll have him up there as a trophy, and you can just walk out with your morning coffee. It's right by your house, and you can see your enemy is dead. So he thinks this is a great idea, and he has that pole erected. The second banquet comes, and right before this happens, something else happens. I don't want to leave this out. The king is having a hard time sleeping. And so he asks for basically what was going on in Congress to be read to him. I mean, how many of you do that when you're having a hard time falling asleep? Let's just watch C-SPAN, okay? That'll get me really, really relaxed. He has them bring out all the records of what's been going on in the kingdom, and his page is reading through these, and it brings up this assassination attempt. And Xerxes says, hey, who told us about that? And the page says, well, it was a man named Mordecai. And Xerxes says, what do we do for him? And the page says, nothing. Mordecai says, okay, let's get Haman in here. Haman, what should I do for somebody who saves the life of the king and honors him above all things? Haman's sitting there thinking, oh, well, he's talking about me. He should get the finest robes and ride on the finest horses and be paraded through town. He should be given great honor, and everyone should see him as a wonderful person. And Haman's thinking, this is going to be sweet. I can't wait to do this. And then Xerxes says, that's awesome. I'm all for it. I'm putting you in charge of that. Go find Mordecai and parade him through and do everything you said. Finest horse, finest clothes, and say, this is what happens for the one that honors Xerxes. Ooh, man, there is some sweet irony in there. And Mordecai has to do this all throughout the country. And so they go around, and he has to do this, and he hates Mordecai all that much more. Finally, the second banquet comes. Haman thinking this time of favor is back, and he's just going to have this wonderful time. And in the midst of the banquet, the king turns and looks at Esther and says, you know, you came into my court the other day, and you said you had a request, but you still haven't told me what that is. Tell me what it is. And now it comes. Then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I wouldn't have bothered you, because no such distress would justify disturbing you. Verse 5, King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Who is he, the man who dared to do such a thing? You got to wonder what Haman's doing at this time. Obviously, he's white as a sheet right now. Esther said, an adversary and enemy, this vile Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. That may be the biggest understatement in the Bible. Haman's caught. But think about what Esther had to do. She had to put her life on the line to go before the king. Now she's calling out one that he has honored in front of all the country, and he has for some reason, a series of respect for this individual. And now she has to say, this one, I know you really like him. He's the one who's trying to kill my people, and I know you're not going to like that. And he didn't. Xerxes orders that Haman is impaled on the very pole that he had saved for Mordecai. The Jewish people are saved, and every year, including this March 9th through 10th, is the Feast of Purim, which is celebrated throughout the world by those that are Jewish, of a time of reflection on how they were saved by Queen Esther. Now, that's a long story, and I do encourage you to read it. But I have to get back to the heart of this story. God was at work behind the scenes, but it took Esther stepping up, because evil prevails when good people do nothing. Esther could have stayed in the comfort of the palace and hoped that maybe it was never found out that she was Jewish and that she would live in her comfort while the cousin who raised her and all the rest of her people were killed. But no, she chose to do something bold. She put her own life on the line, her own reputation on the line, because the cost was too great. The cost was too great for her. My big idea this morning is that evil steps up when leaders stand down. Evil steps up when leaders step down. Had Esther not stepped up into this position, had she chosen to refrain and said, it's none of my business, someone else will take care of it, God will figure out another way, it doesn't have to be me. Should she have done that? Let me tell you something, and you know this from real life. There is no shortage of applicants when somebody doesn't step up to lead. And oftentimes the majority of the applicants are evil, are no good, are not good leaders, are not good people, and so on. They will gladly take that role and step in. They will gladly apply and win. Esther was an amazing woman, brave woman. And let me say this for those of you that, you still may be figuring out, I don't know exactly how I could lead. Let me say this. Leaders are not without fear. Being a leader does not mean that you are never afraid and you just go forward and everyone follow me. It does not mean that at all. No, I believe Esther was probably terrified. And I believe that all these great leaders that we can look at throughout our lives or throughout the world and history were scared to death. But there was something that motivated them to be the first one to walk onto the battlefield, to walk into the mess and say, I have to do something. And it wasn't without fear and trepidation, it's just something had to be done. And the cost was too great to do nothing, as it was with Esther. To do nothing is unheard of. And you know your world, and you know the areas that you have the ability of influence, whether it just be in your home, your job, your community. Maybe it's greater than that. You know the circles of influence that you have, the abilities that you have. And you sometimes see when something needs to be done, but nobody's doing it. For you, this is a call for you to step up and step in and get into the game, to cross the sideline, and to no longer hope that somebody else will be the one to take the lead, but to challenge you to be the one to take the lead. I want to share another verse with you, a very short one out of Proverbs 29:18. It says this, where there is no prophetic vision, the people cast off restraint. But blessed is he who keeps the law. This has also another version said, where there is no vision, the people perish, is what another version says with this. But I like this one better because it says, where there is no prophetic vision, where there is nobody, when you hear prophetic, sometimes people think that means it's somebody who's foretelling the future. In this case, it's not. A prophet is somebody who calls out what's wrong and what's broken and is bold in doing it. It says, where there is nobody doing that, where there's nobody coming in and stepping up and saying, this isn't right. We have to change our ways. We have to do something different. Where there is no one like that, it says that, well, you got the people, they cast off restraint. They do whatever they want. In another translation, it actually says that they're discouraged. They're discouraged from doing what's right. People want somebody to follow. And that person may be you. People need someone to follow. In fact, this morning, a couple of thoughts I'm going to leave you with. Number one, when people refuse to take the lead at your home, when you refuse to just fill the role or the ability of influence that you have in your home, in your job, in your community, or in this very church, three things I believe happen. Number one, the people miss out or are misled. The people miss out on being a part of something big, of being in line with a mission. Our mission as a church is not to fill these seats every week. Our mission every week is to love God, love others, and serve the world. That is what we are going to go forward with. The church was meant to be a movement, not stationary. We need people who will step up into leadership, terrified as you may be, but to take the lead. And you know what? Those around you benefit from that. When a leader refuses to step up, they miss out on that. Or they're misled. Somebody else steps up that is not maybe well-intentioned, and they're misled. A second thing when people refuse to take the lead is that the leader doesn't grow and is responsible for what happens. The leader doesn't grow. You don't get to see what God does through you. You may feel that I'm not really that strong of a leader. You don't get to see how God can take somebody who doesn't think they're much of anything and does great things through them because of him. You miss out on that. You miss seeing God in big ways. But you also bear the responsibility for what happens. You bear the responsibility. If you have the ability to change something evil going on and you did nothing, then you're partly responsible for that problem because you did nothing when you could have. And thirdly, when people refuse to take lead at home, job, or the community or church, something or someone destructive fills the void. Evil will reign. Wrong will reign. Unhealth will reign. When you know what all is on the line for your family, maybe for a child, maybe for a friend, when you see them making bad decisions in their life, when you see them heading a path that they should not head, and you refuse to say anything or to try to help them, you're partly responsible. You could have done something. So this morning, let us be people that will do something rather than just sit around and complain or say somebody else should do it or I don't have the qualifications or whatever. All of us need to understand the level of responsibility that we have. I think most people, when you think of a leader, think of a powerful person, and that is only part of it. I think leadership is more about responsibility than power. And that's what scares people the most, that I will be held responsible for many. We just want to be responsible for ourselves. And I'm asking people to step up into responsibility and to help lead, wherever it may be, in this church or outside, to no longer be on the sidelines. See, it's easier to sit back and be complacent than it is to go against resistance. It's easier to criticize and complain about how things are wrong than it is to actually take the point and lead change. And it's easier to wait for someone else to take the lead than to become responsible for it yourself. Two things I want to leave you with here. Number one, this is a little bit long, and some of you may be familiar with this. Teddy Roosevelt has one of my favorite sayings about being a leader. And this has been circulated a lot, and I'll put it up later on social media, but it says this. Teddy Roosevelt said, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. It's easier to just stay on the sideline. It's totally different to do something. And Esther chose to do something because the cost was too great. So my challenge for you this morning is to think about this week. The cost is too high for me to not step up to lead what? What has too great a cost for you to just ignore? What can't you ignore? Is it your family, or is it your friends, or is it something at your job? Is it something in your community? Is it something in our country that the cost is far too great for you to do nothing? And I challenge you this morning that it's time to get in the game. Even if you are the only one to get in the game, because evil prevails when good people do nothing. Let's pray. Father, there's so many areas that this goes, from parenting to having friends that we have influence over, to leading a ministry in this church, to being a leader in our community and our schools and our jobs. And Lord, every area that we have influence on other people. And Lord, I know many of us are timid, or maybe we don't really realize just what you can do through us, and that you're just looking for people that are worthy or willing to step onto the battlefield, even if we are the only one. We're willing to be the first one because something must be done. And Father, that you would give us the courage that only comes from you, and the boldness that only comes from you, because some of us are afraid to lead. And Father, that you would help us to step in, and you would meet us there, and you would use us as we seek to be vessels for your usage, Lord. I ask that even within the confines of our church, Lord, that there are those that you would challenge to raise up to be leaders, that they would step in and that they would take the challenge on. And Father, I ask that this would be a church that sends out leaders into all the world, into our communities, but not just for any personal causes we have, for the causes of Christ and the mission that you have given us. And Father, we ask for boldness, and we ask this in your name. Amen.